In 6.1.6, they want us to be able to identify the tissues of the small intestine. And we do, when we do this, there's a couple things that we need to identify. So there's two groups of muscles. There's these longitudinal and circular muscles that we need to identify. This thing called the mucosa layer, which is not related to the muscle, and also epithelial cells. And they also might ask you to include, or at least ask you where a villus, right? One villus, many villi, where the villus might be. So let's look at this. All right. So this is your small intestine. So what we're doing is, if you can look at this image, so here we have your pancreas in the middle. Over here we have your small intestine. Here's the duodenum where it connects, and we're looking into, right, that little hole. We're looking down into the small intestine. So that's what this image is trying to show here. So we're just looking down the tube. Now, a couple things I want to point out that confuses students sometimes. Now, that's a villus, which might be like, what? Why is it floating around? These three right here, obviously villi, right? But why is that floating? And that's because villi aren't exactly standing straight up. They might be pointing this way. They could be pointing that way. So if they're pointing in a certain direction and you cut to make that thin slice that will be in the microscope image, it might look like it's floating because the bottom part is not in the screen. So be careful when you see this, because sometimes it can be quite what's the word I'm looking for? Confusing. All right. So I'm just going to move this up out of the way. Okay. So let's draw like what they want you to be able to identify. So many times they're just going to include like a drawing of a couple villi. So here's 1, 2, 3 villi, right? And then they're going to have different layers underneath it. Something like this. So that's kind of like this image. Of course, it looks a lot different in a microscopic image. So these are obviously your villi. There's a villus, but all of these will make up the villi. On the villi are your layers of epithelial cells. So they're just one cell each, and they actually have little villi on top of them too to increase the surface area. So if I was to draw just that cell, it would look something like this, with little cells on top of it. There's the little nucleus. These on the top are called microvilli. So that's like our villus layer. They might only show you the epithelial cells. Maybe they'll show you a couple villi. So it's important for you to like kind of get the picture and understand it. Directly underneath the villi, this area right here is called the mucosa layer, right here. Now in this image, it's all of this lighter purple. So in this image, that would be the mucosa layer. Underneath that, we have our two groups of muscles. Now, if you can kind of think what we're doing, these muscles are pushing the food down your digestive tract. So the outer ones are like squeezing the outside and pushing like food down your small intestine. So eventually it gets through that so all the nutrients can be absorbed. So those are the outer ones. Those are called longitudinal muscles. So longitudinal, because they run like the length of your small intestine. They run all the way, like the tube is this way, they run all the way down the small intestine. The inner one here, this is called your circular muscle. And the circular muscle, when the food pushes down, inside the inner one closes so the food can't go in the opposite direction. And then just to review, the outside here, right, all this space here, right, all this space here is called the lumen.